dive in. Lord, here we are for our last couple sessions. We pray that you would guide us to do the best that we can in every area that you've called us to. In Jesus' name, amen. So here's the overview. We're starting with where excellence begins. You might have seen this illustration before, but if you were to choose $1 million right now or a penny doubled for 31 days, what would you pick? Penny, right? You know where this is going. After 10 days, how much do you have? Any mathematicians rapidly calculating in their head? Just give a guess. You don't have to be right. I really don't care. Someone guess. Huh? 45 cents. $5. Right? What about 20 days? You can only be wrong. Yeah, 5,000, 5,200. 31 days, 10,737,000. Isn't that nuts? Just a penny, added to, doubled every day. Here's the thing. How do you see time? I've always felt like I see things a little differently because I view everything in terms of time. It's probably the biggest thing I'm a little eccentric about because I'm really picky about time, and I'll maybe give you an example. 10 seconds a day is how much a year? Do you know? If you spend 10 seconds on something every day of the year, how much time do you spend a year? An hour. So a minute a day, that would be what? 6 hours, right? 1 minute a day, 6 hours a year. Now, how many of you have keys? Yeah, in like house keys, whatever, right? And you walk up to your door and you're fumbling for your keys, right? And you spend about how much time a day do you spend like fiddling with keys? Probably 30 seconds. Now, if I were to tell you, hey, would you spend 3 hours just trying to find the right key? You would be like, no, that's ridiculous. I don't want to do that, right? And so for me, I'm weird like that. So I constantly figure things out. I found this key holder that holds them all in a little pocket knife type thing. And I have all the keys I use most often. So as I'm walking up to a door, I have the right key without even having to look already out. And I can just open it and pop it back. So I do weird things like that. I remember when I was in Michigan, we would have to take our jackets off all the time when we get home. And I just got really annoyed that I'd be in and out multiple times between classes, maybe 4 or 5 times a day, and I have to hang up my jacket, put it in the closet, and it was just annoying, quite honestly. So finally, I got this idea. What about one of those hat racks, and you can just chuck your jacket on it and just leave it there, because you're going to be out in a few minutes anyway. So I started doing that, and I tell you what, I probably saved 30 hours a year or something ridiculous in just taking my jacket off and putting it in the closet, because now we had a neat rack we could put it on. So that's how I think. When I bought an iron, I was like, I want an iron that doesn't take a minute to start up, right? I want it to be hot in 30 seconds. So I researched a better iron because that wastes time, right? And then I was like, well, how can I turn the iron on while I'm still getting out of the shower so that by the time I get there, it's hot anyway? And anyway, smart home is fun. So 15 to 20 minutes a day is 90 to 120 hours a year, or 11 to 15 work days. I've anecdotally said this before, but if you have to use the restroom for, let's say, 15 to 20 minutes a day, unethical life pro tip, do it at work, because you'll save yourself 2 weeks of extra leave, right? Over time. Anyway, that's bad advice. I'm just kidding, but you get the idea. All right. Where you take your time makes a difference. You thought you only get 2 weeks of leave or something, you can double that. Anyway. Here's the thing. If you read 20 minutes a day, 6 days a week, that is a lot of time, 6,240 minutes a year. If you can read a page a minute, that's 32 200-page books a year. How many read more than 20 books a year? Praise the Lord. That's awesome. How many read more than 30 books a year? How many read more than 40 books a year? Okay. Last year I read 46 books, and I'm not doing that again. Because I was driving a lot, I was listening to audiobooks. But yeah, if every book improves your life by 3%, what would that do to your life? Over 1 year, you would go from 100% of who you are today. At the end of that year, you would be either there doing nothing or you would be twice the person you are today. Just spending 15 to 20 minutes a day reading. I mean, imagine what you could become, right? I tell you what, as I started reading, I got the idea originally from Dwight Nelson. He challenged us in 2015 at a convention I was at. He was like, look, pastors should be reading. If you're not reading, you're not improving. And I hated reading because I just finished with school and I was burnt out from it. And I was like, let me just start with a little bit. And so ever since then, I've tried to ramp it up, and it's changed my life. Like, I'm not the same person today I was a year ago, and I'm not the same person that I was the year before that, etc., because I've gained new skills and abilities and ways to do things. Time is everything. In North America, Gen Z spends an average of 2 hours and 3 minutes a day on social media. Guess how much time that is a year? This is insane. That's 3 months of your entire year if you count 8-hour days out of it. On social media, 3 months. Take a vacation. Like, imagine what you could do, right? Now, granted, you can't conglomerate all that time and actually take a vacation, but if you were using that time for something even more valuable, what could that do? So I became a bit convicted of that. Some of you may be aware there's a screen time function on the iPhone. I don't know about Android, but there's a feature you can see how much time you spent in apps. And I started looking at my apps, and Esther, my wife, actually started this first. She looked and she's like, I'm spending too much. I'm going to set a 2-minute limit today on social media. And I'm like, 2 minutes? You can't even open the app in that time. Come on. So anyways, I just ignored it for a while. And finally I was like, I think I can do 7 minutes. And at least when I hit 7 minutes, I can always say add 5 minutes, and I can at least be aware. And since I started doing that, I've cut down my social media time by a factor of at least 2 to 3. So be aware of the time that you spend. What's your average? And maybe it's not social media. Maybe it's something else. Where are the inefficiencies in your life that, maybe just relaxing, right? Are there areas that you can improve? Because here's the thing. In team dynamics and team management, improving the team starts with improving ourselves. And that's going to be my point here. We looked at Genesis 1 earlier, but earlier on in Genesis, God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. What is God talking about here? In what way are we in his image? Give me some feedback. Decision making. What else? Can you? Knowing good and evil? Certainly after the fall, even more so, but even before we had some ability to differentiate. What else? We exhausted our ideas. What does it mean? Let's look at the rest of the verse. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over the cattle, over all the earth and every creeping thing. What does it mean for God to make us in his image? The very next thing it mentions is, what's the next verb? Let them have dominion. So there's the have and there's dominion. But here's the thing. God gives us dominion, and here's the point. We were made not just to go along through life and let things happen to us. We were made to have dominion, and as one of my teachers once told me, we were made to be kings and queens. That puts a little different frame on things in life. We were made to be kings and queens, and not only that, we were made not to subjugate as kings and queens do. We were made in the context of not so with you and give rather than take. We were made to protect, to guard, to help things flourish, to have control over every area of our lives that we're constantly improving, right? Because it's in that sense that when we're kings and queens of our own lives, that we have complete control over our own lives by God's grace and help, right? What could God do with us? I mean, I'll tell you what God did with 12 people in the book of Acts, right? He multiplied them overnight and turned the world upside down. So what could God do with you and I if we really believe that we were made to be kings and queens? Because that's what God started us off with, to have dominion over the world around us, to have control, agency, free will. Jesus, we know he grew in 4 ways, right? Intellectual. What are some of the others?
Wisdom.
Yeah, so he grew intellectually, physically. What else? Spiritually. Which one's missing? Socially. There you have it. So Jesus grew in every area of his life. And here's the thing, like intellectually, right? It's kind of weird. Like Mary had to like read Bible verses that Jesus himself once spoke, right? And he had to memorize and learn those from scratch. Kind of blows your mind, right? Like he didn't actually know, like he had to learn how to say words. It kind of blows your mind. It's just, yeah, he started from a baby. Here's what Ellen White says in education. Higher than the highest human thought can reach is God's ideal for his children. We've heard this 1,000 times. Probably godliness, godlikeness is the goal to be reached before the student. There is opened a path of what? Continual progress. He has an object to achieve, a standard to attain that includes everything good and pure and noble. He will advance as fast and as far as possible in every branch of true knowledge, but his efforts will be directed to objects as much higher than mere selfish and temporal interests as the heavens are higher than the earth. What could God do with your life if you aimed higher than you currently do? This is what I've often said in ministry. It's like we aim and we're like, oh, well, you know, how are we going to use a $100,000 budget? Why are we saying we have a $100,000 budget? Let's just pretend we have a $1 million budget. What would we do if money was no issue? Like, God can provide, can't he? Like, why do we limit ourselves by what we see around us? I remember one year I was serving with Pathway to Health, and I think we were like missing, it was either a few $100,000 or $1 million worth of pharmaceuticals for their pharmacy section. It had gone lost. And lo and behold, when we got to the convention center, to the stadium, whatever, there was a trailer or this big container full of pharmaceuticals. It was not the one that was sent. We did not know where it came from. But God had provided. I can just imagine angels transporting and dumping a full-on truckload of all the supplies that we needed. I don't know where it came from to this day. Maybe someone found out later where it came from, but God does things that we don't expect when we commit ourselves to him, and we will believe that he can do more than we could imagine. See, here's the thing. Excellence begins with commitment to be completely sold out to God, and it's achieved when we intentionally plan and take action to marginally improve every area of our lives, a little bit at a time, right? So that's it starts with selling out to God, and it continues. Why does it have to start with God? Why does excellence have to start with God? Yeah, I mean, that's true. That's not wrong. But here's the thing. When we're not sold out to God, we take as well as give, right? And when we take, how much do we lose? You know, if I start taking and maybe I get addicted to, I don't know, maybe it's media or something else, whatever the case may be, and I'm spending a lot of my time doing other things than what I could be doing and improving my life, like what type of a person will I be a year from now? If I decide that I'm going to spend an extra 15 minutes a day on Reddit and not, read, like a year from now, I'm going to be just as dumb as I was to begin with when I could have been 200% smarter in a bunch of different avenues and interests. It costs us so much when we're not all in. So I want to talk a bit about constructing teams. We'll look at Priesthood Principles. We're going to try to fly through these because I know the time. My enemy ticks against me, as someone once told me, and it's ticking fast. So when you want to start building a team, how do you begin? One of the hardest things is finding the right people, right? We all struggle with that. Unfortunately, I don't have the magical solution to finding people besides prayer, looking and asking and reaching out to other people to see if they know anyone. But I'll give you some tools for how I've learned to work with teams well. In the interview process, I would start with ultimate meaning and purpose. You remember when I gave the illustration of washing dishes and how I framed that? Like how the impact it has and the effect it has, rather than, hey, would you grab a sponge and start scrubbing? It makes a difference how you frame things. If you start with meaning and purpose and inspire people, now they're actually interested, right? More than they were before. And then you can start to evaluate, is this person really skilled? Do they have the ability to do what we're asking them to do? And then you want to end with clarity and role objectives. I'll show you what that means in the next slide. But before that, something I found is super helpful for volunteers is a trial basis. Have you ever had someone on your team or someone you know, or maybe it's yourself, I don't know, You set out to do something and you realized that it was a little more than you could handle, or more than you were motivated, or more than they were motivated for, or something didn't happen, right? And you're like, maybe they weren't like best suited to that position, but now they're stuck because it's going to be an awkward conversation to shift things around, right? When we started doing a trial basis with GYC, it made like a world of difference for me, because now I could be like, hey, let's try this out for 2 to 3 months. And then our executive committee will meet at the end of that, evaluate, and we'll either set it in stone for the next 2 years, or we'll figure out where you might fit better. That made all the difference for us. Here's how I would share expectations. So you see the asterisk there, end with clarity on role objectives. I didn't come up with, I saw the system online, and then I came up with a model of it for GYC. Let's see if I can switch to a magnifying glass here. Here we go. So on the left, I have my department. This is the communicate. It's actually making it worse, isn't it? Can anyone not see the text? Cool. I'm not going to zoom in then. Okay, so on the left, you have all the different tasks that I had for communications with GYC, marketing strategy, social relations, social media, program booklet designing, T-shirts, staff meetings, etc., like whatever. And it's called the RACI chart because it's made up of these categories. Responsible is R, accountable is A, support is S, consulted is C, and I is informed. And each one means something different. So the person who's responsible is the one who does the actual work. So you'll see that up here, I was the vice president at the time, so there were only really 3 things I was responsible for. And it just happened to match with my skills and ability at the time. So I would produce the promo materials and promo video and the program booklet. Well, actually, I didn't produce the promo video, but I was in charge of the team that produced it. So I would probably have put there instead, like accountable. I should have put an A there probably. So the whole point of this chart is you get to see who does what. So R for Daniel Arroyo means he did the marketing strategy and school relations that year. S meant that, like for the program booklet, I had a supporter as I designed it. So I would design the program booklet there. Maybe a pointer would help. Here we go. So yeah, I would design the program booklet. I was responsible, and then my assistant would check it for English grammar and everything else, and the project would get done, right? And then there might be people that we would keep informed because they might give input or they might consult. So each of these things like basically meant a different relationship on the task and who was doing what in relation to that task. So it may seem a little fuzzy now, but as you take time to look at it, I'll share the slide. You can begin to do this type of thing with your own departments. It's not like something you check every day, but just having that clarity makes a world of difference in like, okay, well, who's supposed to like make that happen? And like, should you have consulted with someone? Should you have kept someone informed? Who signs off on the work, etc.? It makes a huge difference. I only really needed to do this once, and then from then on, I could just be like, hey, you fall under, whatever position I had at the top here. Like, there's your responsibilities. You can see Daniel had none. Anyway, he came and left pretty quickly. Okay, constructing volunteer teams, part 2. The next thing you want to do is train and empower people. What is the difference between empowering versus delegating? Someone tell me what you think the difference is. Don't all scream at once. Okay, correct. And empowering, in contrast, how would you view that differently, if at all? You kind of take the role of a mentor instead of a boss. Uh-huh. Yeah, empower, it's like coming alongside someone and like giving them more than just being like, hey. So yeah, empowering makes a big difference. So, I mean, it kind of gives it away there. You walk alongside instead of dictating. So you come up to the person, this is how I do it for visitation. Believe it or not, people don't know how to do visitation. So I'll come alongside, I'll say, hey, I'll do the first 3 doors, and then you copy me, and I do it with them, right? And by doing it with them, it's so much better than saying, hey, here's a list of things to say, go do it. Are they going to do it? Maybe, probably not. It makes it harder. Commending successes, making people realize that they're actually succeeding, finding ways to encourage them as you go makes a big difference. And then documenting. I just finished reading a book. What was it called? I read too many books and I don't remember the titles. But anyway, follow me on Goodreads if you want to see my recent book list. But one of the books I read recently It was called it's my Kindle. I'm going to check because it was a really good book, and it may be of interest to you. Kindle. It was like an old-fashioned... I'm signed out. Check on my phone. Kindle. It was like, I read the title of the book, and I was like, this is going to be such a lame book. And then it actually ended up being really cool for like starting businesses and all sorts of ideas. And it was called The EMyth Revisited. I thought it was like the internet myth revisited, but it was actually talking about starting businesses and how entrepreneurs, as they start up, they often like follow the wrong trajectory. And like the whole thrust of the whole book is in documenting your process and making it repeatable so that, like McDonald's, right? They claim that like no McDonald's has ever shut down and like gone out of business because they struggled, right? Because they have such a robust system that wherever you place it, it works. That's what we should strive for. We should document every little piece of the process that we do so that if someone replaces us, like, yeah, we still want to walk alongside and empower them, but even if we didn't, they would have such a detailed checklist that like they could just do it. I mean, what would it look like if we had that? I know GYC didn't have that as much as we needed in some departments, and it made it really hard when we transitioned. Something I was known for is 15-minute meetings. I hate meetings with a passion. And it's just me. So I would do meetings that were 15 minutes long with like a 5-6 person team. And I'd be like, okay, here's what we're doing. Reports and recommendations only. If there's something we need to like discuss and figure out, we'll make a little subcommittee. They can come back with like 2 recommendations. We'll approve and discuss depending. Now, this may or may not work in your context, but we would cover 3 things. So if I was starting with like person A, I'd say, okay, give me, what did you do in the last month, right? What are your plans for the next month? Do you have any recommendations we need to vote? And part of the plans for next month, if they had any needs that we might come in with the recommendations, hey, I need help with this. Okay, now I know, write it down, I'll circle back to you. And so I would just like go through and I'd literally time each person. And so they knew that like we weren't gonna waste, and guess what? My attendance went from like 50% to 100% because everyone knew it was 15 minutes and the meeting would be done. We didn't have to waste time, we could just keep going. I loved that. It only went for like 6 months, and then I think I switched teams, but moved to another department. But worked well while it lasted, and I love the idea. Another big thing that we often don't do is we're in ministry, so we don't have time to like have fun as people. If you ever come to the place where you don't have time to like maybe go out and like play crazy golf or go karting or do something trivial just to develop friendships and relationships with new people, you may find that you don't have as sold out volunteers. Because usually what happens is organizations start out and they're all friends, right? And so things go really well, and it's like this honeymoon phase. They're like, we're all friends, we're having a great time. And then eventually you get like a new volunteer and they come in, and from their perspective it's a clique, and from your perspective like, you're trying to involve them, and it's just like you wonder why things don't work. Find time for the common things of life with them and see if that doesn't make a world of difference. I'm telling you, it makes all the difference in the world. Spending that time together. I mean, even if it's just a Bible study that's not related to whatever you're doing, even that can make a difference because you're connecting outside of requirements and responsibilities. Priesthood Principles. How fast do I want to go through the section? I think we can. Okay, I'm going to divvy this up. Everyone take one verse. So I'm going to start Matthew 18:20. If you want to take that verse, raise your hand and you'll take it. Matthew, okay, 18:20. Ephesians, I'll do that one because I'm going to skim it. 1 Peter 2:4-6. Okay, you can take that, and then someone can take verse 9. Okay, you can take verse 9. Matthew 18:1-5. You can take it. 1 Corinthians 12:11. Seth. 1 Corinthians 11:18. I guess, Andrew, you can take that. Romans 12:5. Heidi, you can take it. Okay. 5 Testimonies 2:91. Wait, you didn't bring it with? Okay, I'll do that one too. Okay, so let's start with Matthew 18:20. The point here is that we seek God's will corporately and interdependent. I think Louw was the intention there, through his word as guided by the Spirit. Matthew 18:20. Who had that?
For where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, I am there in
Okay, so God is with us when we come together. Ephesians, let's skip that for the moment. 1 Peter 2, verse 4 through 6.
Coming to him as to a living stone, rejected indeed by men, but chosen by God and precious. You also, as living stones, are being built up in the spiritual house, a holy priesthood, to offer up the spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. Therefore it is also contained in the Scripture, behold, I lay in Zion the chief cornerstone, the elect precious, and he who believes on him will by no means be put to shame.
Okay, and then verse 9.
But you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, his own special people, that you may proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light.
Okay, so all these verses, basically, especially that last verse, show that we're interconnected as a kingdom of priests, so to speak. So as it started out, you read, Exodus, Israel started out where God actually wanted everyone to be priests. The head of every household was originally coming out of Egypt, supposed to be priests of their home and priests before God. But when the golden calf incident happened, he said, no, it's only going to be the Levites. So he limited it to one group rather than all the tribes. And yet we see once again, after Christ comes, that he switches it back and says, now every Christian is a priest, so to speak. Now, priests and pastors are two different things. We're not talking about that they're perfectly equivalent. But the key here is that we all come to Christ, right? We don't need to go to a priest to ask for forgiveness, right? That's more of a Catholic perspective. We don't need to bring a lamb, right? We can pray to Jesus. He is the lamb. So it changes the dynamic somewhat. Ephesians 5:21. Who had that verse? Anyone? Whoever had it may have forgotten they had it, or I skipped it. Basically, all of Ephesians 4 and 5 talk about submitting one to another. I'm sure you're familiar with that. So let's go to Matthew 18, 1 through 5.
At that time the disciples came to Jesus, saying, who then is greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Then Jesus called a little child to him, set him in the midst of them, and said, assuredly I say to you, unless you are converted and become as little children, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself as this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever receives one little child like this in my name receives me.
This idea is everywhere of not so with you and of giving rather than everywhere. Jesus repeats this throughout his ministry. But the idea here, as I've listed here, is we honor, there's a sense in which we honor the authority of officers and people where they are, and yet we still need to become as children, right? We still need to trust and rely on others too. 1 Corinthians 12, 11, and 18. I think that was two different people. We'll start with 11.
All these things are the work of one and the same Spirit, and he distributes them to each one, just as he determines.
Okay, 18.
But now God has sent members, each one of them, in the body just as he pleased.
Okay, so God, we already talked about this a little bit earlier today, how God places people where he wants them. And then finally, Romans 12, verse 5.
So we, being many, are one body in Christ and individually members of one body.
Okay, so we've read all these texts, we got all these ideas. How do we make this practical? When I first started out in Army of Youth Ministries, I remember someone came to us and we studied this out. It was the Priesthood of Believers Principles. It came from Leroy Moore at Weimar. He wrote a book, Power of Humility, and these principles were found in this book. Phenomenal little book. I've only ever read half of it. Every time I get to it, I get bogged down in it for some reason. But that one thing in that book made it worth the part that I did read. And he brings out these principles. When you're relating to other people in a team, here are some keys. Number one, responsibility of office requires authority for each office. So that doesn't mean I'm over you. It just means I have the authority of this role. And I've been given a task to do, and I'm the one who should do it. And each authority, each office with authority requires that accountability be a part of the equation, right? So accountability is super important. And here's the problem that we often see in ministry, over and over again. Isn't it annoying when you're the organized person, right, and you give someone something to do, and they just kind of drop the ball, And what is your biggest temptation? Let me help it out just a little bit. I'll call them up. Can I do that for you? And guess what? Like the next time you ask them to do the same thing, guess what? You helped them last time, so guess what's going to happen this time? You get to do it again, right? So like that's the problem. So there are several ways that priesthood principles are undermined, and number one is the person neglects the responsibility, right? And that's the first problem. And authority, you come to the situation like, well, they neglected their responsibility. Rather than having a conversation with them, I'll just do it and it'll be done, right? And now what you've done is you've gone to their kingdom, right? And you've been like, haha, you were the king, but now I'm the king. Bump you out the way, and I'll do your job for you. And by the way, it's done. Like, aren't you relieved? And like, yeah, they are relieved on the one hand because they probably didn't want to do it, but now they also feel disempowered. Now they feel like there's a lack of value, and it just messes everything up. And here's the thing. When you exercise authority not assigned to your office, that overreaching disempowers people so much that before too long, you'll find that you don't have a volunteer in that capacity anymore. I struggle with this in many ways, but one of the most common ways in many churches is with the webmaster of the website, right? Because you need something updated, and you need it updated yesterday, and maybe they take 3 days, right? And you would have done it immediately, and it really doesn't make that much difference at the end of the day, maybe, but maybe it does. And you could just do it yourself, but you get the idea. This happens with any task that you end up waiting on. So yeah, here's the thing. When you give a task to someone, rely on them so much so that you are willing to have a conversation. Hey, what's up? Like, we had this deadline, like what happened? Is there any way I can help you? If they reach out and say, hey, I have all these assignments due at the same time and I couldn't get it done, like, it's okay to help them if you've had a conversation. But if you just go ahead and steal their kingdom, it makes it really hard for them to feel like their role has value. So that's a huge principle, and it's part of how we can succeed best, recognizing that as priests, like, we have to work together. We can't be like one-upping other people. Communication guidelines. This is kind of another part of the smorgasbord of ideas. In order of typical effectiveness, what is the most effective form of communication? I mean like mode of communication, like email, text, phone call. Parables are the most effective means of storytelling. Verbal. My fault. Verbal is the most effective too. Not always, but very frequently. Depends on the person though. Okay, so you're actually right. In-person, face-to-face is at the top. Then you have, video calls, right? That's like the next best, especially with pandemics. Text messages. People will usually see and respond to those pretty frequently, depending on the type of person you're working with. There are some people who will never respond to a text message. Hey, they exist. So know your audience. Voicemails are another one that sometimes aren't as good. Secondary, you have messenger clients, physical mail, live announcements up front at like a church or event. Email is one of the worst, and yet it works really well when you've got a list of 1 million people, because even if 1% respond, you get responses. But who has 1 million people on their list? Social media posts used to be great, but now you have to monetize and pay to really make things go viral. So unless you have a way to make that happen and you're just like figuring out the system, good luck. So these are the challenges that we face overall. So with GYC, mostly what I would do, it depended on the audience. It depends on what kind of audience you're trying to reach. If your goal is to reach a specific individual or target group of people, maybe a business or a place you're looking for a venue to have a meeting, then you need to be a little bit more aggressive and use primary means of communication. You will inherently know this. You've probably done it many times and noticed it works best. So that is, looks something like this. Call. And then if they don't answer, if they do answer, first of all, send a follow-up thank you, right? So now they have a reminder. I do this all the time. I did this with Sebastian Braxton the other day, and I did it with someone else too. I'll send them a text. They'll be like, oh yeah, I'll get that to you. And like, I'll wait a day and I'll thumb up their text message, because now it serves as a reminder without me having to text them and remind them, right? So like I build delay into my responding to them, because I know that they may not get back to me right away, and at least I give them one more chance to respond before I'm like, hey, where is it? Like you said you'd have it yesterday, right? So it does the same thing as calling, then sending a follow-up email or text. restating your conclusions, like, hey, thank you so much for our call about this. I'm really looking forward to our collaboration doing this, right? Because now they've got multiple ways, and if at any time in the future they're like, I didn't see it that way, here's the email, here's the proof, right? You can't go wrong when you've got it written down on paper. And this helps a lot. Like, sometimes agreements break down and you never expected it to because we're all Christians, right? And this will save you many a time. If it goes to voicemail, sometimes I'll send a follow-up text, hey, just trying to get a hold of you. Do you have a minute? I did this also with Sebastian the other day. I was trying to get a hold of him. And I said, hey, when can we talk? He's like, like maybe on Monday. And I was like, well, I think he said Sunday. It was Friday afternoon. He was like super busy. So I said, hey, I tried to get a hold of you like a while back. Is any chance you could just give me 3 minutes? I'll time it. Like, I actually said that. And he's like, oh, sure, I can give you 3 minutes. And so I called him up, and it was great. We got to catch up all in 3 minutes. And I got to ask the question I had. And at the end of the 3 minutes, I was like, sorry, time's up. He's like, oh, no worries. And we ended up going for 5 minutes, which is all the time I needed anyway, right? So, like, start small, and it'll actually work. So there's an element of persistence that we often don't go to. This is my point. Persistence is key. Like, you be the on-the-ball person. Use multiple methods of communication. And don't just rely on, I left a voicemail and they just never go back to me. No, like, use at least 2 to 3 methods. And if that doesn't work, then, like, good luck, right? So there are some people I have to text every day for like 3 or 4 days, or call 3 or 4 days in a row, and finally they'll get back to me just because I'm being annoying. So that's life, right? If your goal is to reach a general target, then secondary modes are fine. This is mass emails or you're announcing your event on social media. These are generally not the most reliable. We would spend for GYC like $10,000 on social media ads, and we would find that it would bring back like a tenfold return in registrations. But if you were to ask all those people how they heard about GYC and why they signed up, they'll all tell you it was word of mouth and friends. For some reason, like, they don't tell you it was social media, because I guess they heard about it from a friend and that's really what got them, but what prompted them may have been the ad. So it works, but yeah, it's usually high cost and it just kind of depends. But yeah, multiple secondary modes makes a big difference. So they say that for secondary modes, for people to even realize you're announcing something, you have to find 7 ways to repeat it. So at my church, for example, we'll announce an event's coming up. And then people will be like, oh, I didn't know that happened last Monday. Like, when did you announce it? And we're like, we've been announcing it for like 4 weeks. And guess what? They came in, like their standard time they come into church, maybe 5 minutes late after announcements. I don't know. And they do that consistently, and that whole mode of communication will never work for them. So that's why we have to branch out. What about planning? One of my previous senior pastors came up with this, Dan Soames, CES BP 1 through 3. And I was like, what in the world is this? CES BP. All I knew CES was the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, which is like the biggest electronics show in the world. And I was like, BP, isn't that like a gas station? So I was like, what in the world? And he's like, no, it's connect with God. The very first thing in the morning, connect with God. Exercise, shower, have breakfast. And then P is plan your top 1 through 3 goals. Now, I don't always do it in that order, but I tell you what, if I do nothing else but connect with God, shower, eat breakfast, and plan, like you do it in that general order and you get to the point where you're planning your goals for the day, it makes such a difference. I do this with my wife every morning. I say, hey, what are your 3 plans for the day? Here's my 3 plans for the day. And it's accelerated our successes hugely as a result. How many of you have heard of this book? It's becoming a little bit of an outdated book now. It came out only like a few years ago, maybe like 5 years ago, but I've not heard as many people talking about it now. It was a New York bestseller. It's an amazing book. There may be 1 or 2 less than ideal words in it, but overall the information is excellent. Here's the point of the entire book. Ask yourself this question. What one thing can I do such that by doing it, everything else will become easier or unnecessary? Imagine if you approach the things that you have to do in that way. I did this with taking my jackets off and not wanting to hang them up. I was like, what one thing could I do that everything else would become easier in that line of things, right? And I was like, I'll get a coat rack. And it saves me like 30 hours a year that I'm not just like going, putting stuff on. If you do that in different areas of your life, it will save you dividends. It will make such a difference. In fact, even in ministry, if I say, is there a way that I can one thing that'll make it easier for people to even hear my sermons maybe, right? Maybe it's giving them a handout. Maybe it's coming up with a new way to have them interact or text in answers or something. What would make it easier or even eliminate things that I usually have to do? It's a powerful question. It makes a big difference. How many of you have heard of Parkinsons Law? What does it sound like? Parkinson's Law. I didn't know about this till last year. It was one of the books or something that I read. Work will expand to fill the time allotted for its completion. Have any of you come across this? Isn't that annoying? You're like, this will just take half an hour, and the whole day goes by, and you're like, I'm still only halfway through. It happens all the time. This is why, on the one hand, things can take all day, or if you procrastinate, you somehow squeeze it in and make it work. Have you ever noticed that dynamic? You procrastinate on an assignment, you rush and you rush and you rush, and somehow, it just happens to work out that you finish, you get it printed out and handed in at the last second, right? And you're like, other times it takes me all day. What gives? Something happens in our brains. I don't know what it is, but our brains work better sometimes with pressure. So here are some power moves you can do to take advantage of Parkinson's Law. Limit the time you assign for things each day and pace them in advance instead of procrastinating. So tell yourself, use the Pomodoro technique. Anyone heard of the Pomodoro technique? I'm going to ask you for raise hands just because I'm curious. This is a great technique. I use it for all sorts of things. I'll tell you in a moment. And then question repetitive time-consuming tasks with the question I just mentioned. Should I really be doing this? Is there anything I can do to make this no longer necessary? My favorite thing for this last one, if I'm doing repetitive tasks, is can a spreadsheet fix it? If I put a bunch of formulas in, it'll automatically calculate stuff for me. Could I just paste in information later and it just gives me the answer? I've used spreadsheets for all sorts of things for that. But yeah, let's talk about the Pomodoro technique, because this is key to limiting the time that you assign. The Pomodoro technique is based off of those little kitchen timers. Maybe you've seen one in your grandma's house or something, and you turn it, it's usually a tomato or something else. You might think it's a tomato, but you'd be wrong. So whatever the case is, right, maybe it's some other kind of fruit, and you set your timer for 25 minutes, and now you've got a deadline, right? And so you cram away, and at the end of that 25 minutes, you're like, am I done? And you get to choose if you're going to do multiple and take a long break or take a short break. Honestly, I don't even follow this technique properly. I just start with one, and when I'm done with that, I just decide, am I going to keep on going or am I done? And usually, I just keep on going. But that's just me. So it kind of depends on the type of person. If you really need a break, take your break. It's always good to get some exercise and whatnot, especially if you're working an hour or longer. They say it's better for your brain. Something I've noticed, though, and a lot of science has shown this as well, is when you're really in the zone with something, this may be more of a guy thing, I don't know, tell me if I'm wrong. I get so in the zone when I'm focused on something. My wife will be like, hey, lunch is ready. Don't even hear it. I'm just tunnel vision. It's literally I'm in a tunnel. Everything around the screen I'm looking at is black, right? And I'm just so it's I'm living in a spreadsheet or web page or whatever the case is, right? Whatever I'm working on, maybe it's writing a sermon, and I don't hear anything else. And then eventually my wife will have to come, Eric, what are you doing? Come on, let's go. I get tunnel vision, and so what I find is if I stop mid-task, it takes me half an hour just to get back up to the level of focus I had. You build up to it. I don't know, that's just me. Other people, maybe it works the same way or different. But I get so focused that I find that it's way more efficient to just work once you've got momentum than to pause and start up all over again. Eisenhower Matrix is another tool. Anyone heard of this before? This is maybe one of the most useful. I got this in college. You've probably seen this before. You just didn't know what the name of it was. Anyone seen this before? Yeah, exactly. You recognize it once you see it. So this is a phenomenal tool to figure things out. So what I'd like you to do is try this out. Think of 10 different tasks. We'll take 5 minutes for this. Think of maybe just a few tasks that you have. Maybe they're repetitive tasks. We won't split up all over the place. Maybe just try to conglomerate in mini groups around yourselves. And think, maybe pull up your to-do list for like your next event or something, right? And think to yourself, like, where should these things fit? Because sometimes there are things that are important and urgent you should do now, yeah, and you should just like do right away. But the hardest part is often these ones up here. Because sometimes you have to schedule things and they're not just one sit down, are they? Like it may take hours to actually get done. And so the question is, are you going to leave this until like next month and like cram? Or are you going to say, I'm going to do 5 minutes a day on this and still make most of my time in the green section? Or are things that are not important? Like someone calls you up and says, hey, would you come and be the clown at my birthday party? I don't know, right? And it's not important, it's not urgent. What should you do? Delete, right? Delegate. Like that is not something you need to do, right? So like this is what we do for tasks. Many times we reluctantly say yes because we don't know how to say no, and we end up with all these things. Many of them are urgent. Like my dad, he'll call me up, he'll be like, hey, my computer's not working, like, can you help me? And for him, super important. For me, not as important, right? Now, if I'm focusing on giving rather than taking, then I'll usually help him. But here's the thing, like, it may be super urgent and important to him, but like, he can reach out to IT at his conference. It's not a big deal. Like, there's a whole department for that. For me, that's not my primary responsibility. So I might just say, hey, look, could I suggest that you reach out to IT? Because that's their job. And I might feel a little bit bad that I couldn't help him out, but like, maybe I've got other things that are urgent and important. So think of, let's just do like 3 tasks. Think of 3 tasks that you have that are coming up, one big one medium one small one, and figure out where it fits. So take a moment for that. I'll give you 2 minutes. And then share it with the person next to you. Come on, pull up your phone.
Supposed to be within AIM?
Yeah, let's do it with teams within AIM. And if you don't have the rest of your AIM team here, share just some personal things that you get asked to do or you have for school, or I don't know if you have a job or whatever the case is. Maybe here's what we'll do. Instead of small groups, why don't just make it maybe easier? How about you share a task and we all decide where it fits? Would that be more fun?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Give me a task.
Adding team members.
Adding team members. Where does that fit? Is that important?
Yes.
Is it urgent?
Yes.
Yeah, so figure that one out, right? What else do we have? Some other tasks that you have to do. Well, you think you have to do. Fix your email list. Important. Super important, right? Sooner or later. Urgent? For some of you, it may be, right?
Yeah, it is. It's been a problem for a while.
Okay, so you have been treating it as if it's not urgent, but you know it's important.
Okay, it's not my responsibility. It's not under mine.
Okay, fair enough. But yeah, like if you were the person in charge of that, you might be in the blue section when you need to be in the green section, right? And sometimes you can get by at 90% of operating capacity and succeeding by bumping it down the line. What else do we have? Give me another example or 2.
Figure out our hike location.
Figure out your what location?
Hike location.
Hike location. Oh, yeah. A week ago, before it's actually happening, it may not seem important or urgent, right? So that's going to be time sensitive. If you're hiking this afternoon, you might want to get on it, right? What else?
Writing a thank you note to a speaker who came to your retreat.
Oh, this is a hard one with my wife and I when we got married. The problem is that people give you gifts. And I don't know about you, but like millennials, like we could care less about notes often. I don't know if it's the same with Gen Z. Like I would just text thank you. But the previous generation, like if they don't get a card in the mail that says thank you for your gift and like names the gift, oh, you'll hear about it. So yeah, we delayed like a month and people started asking like, did you get my gift? Like, anyway. So yeah, no, that can be super important for relations, right? Depends on your audience. Yeah, always nice to get, but not always, doesn't always feel important for every generation alike. Let's do one more. Yes?
Make name tags.
Make name tags. Okay. Talk to me. Where would you put it?
Well, this is the
When is your retreat that you're making?
It hasn't been picked yet.
Okay, well, then is it important? Like, if you didn't have name tags, would that be okay? It might be okay. It might be. It may not be excellent, but it may be okay. You know, like right now, I wish you all had name tags. You don't wish you all had name tags. But that's the dynamic, right? It's important to different people. So you have to step back and say, you know, who is this important to? That doesn't mean they should do it. It's not your guest's responsibility to make name tags. But it's worth thinking about. So, yeah, it may not be urgent months out, but once you get to the event, you may want to plan to it. So I hope this is helpful. It's something that I don't sit down and like write this out, but I always have it in my mind. Where would this fit? And every so often I'll come across a task that I should just straight out have said no to, and somehow I ended up with it. And I have to backtrack and say, hey, you know, sorry, like things got busy, and I really just don't think I can pull this off. And that's okay. Saying no is really important sometimes for health and success. So we just did our activity. Let's move on. What to do when you lack motivation? Anyone ever experienced this? Oh, I was going to skip this section. You serious? What? Come on. Okay. Anyone heard of this book? You've probably heard of the other book, Power of Habit. Anyone heard of Power of Habit? That one's like all over the place right now. This is the better of the two books. I've read both of them. Both books are excellent. I'd recommend you read both. This book will change your life. Depending on how much time we'll get into this, but I'll hand these out. So grab one and hand it down, and only look at the chart for now. We're not going to go into the rest, so just hand them out until everyone's got one. Here's where it starts. The secret to habits that last. This is how we work psychologically in our minds. Now, my wife and I had a debate about this. She's like, I don't work this way. And so I asked her some questions, and she's like, okay, I do work this way. So like sometimes you don't see initially that you work this way, but everyone fundamentally works this way in some way, shape, or form. So look at the screen for the moment. We'll look at the handouts in just a bit. The secret to habits that last is ABC. Anchor, behavior, celebration. Anchor is the prompt to do something. For me, I do this all the time. Hey Siri, remind me to send Caleb $5 at 6 p.m. And then I'll get a reminder at 6 p.m. It'll pop up on my phone, and I'm like, that's my prompt. Like I got it added on both my devices at once. So here's the thing, like prompts are everything. For some of you, it's writing a sticky note and sticking it on your fridge. Or maybe on the mirror, and like as you're doing your hair in the morning, like, oh yeah, I need to remember that, right? For some of you, it may be something else. For me, here's what I do all the time. I will put obstacles in my way. Like if laundry needs to be done, I will put it right in the doorway so that when I get up, before I get to the bathroom, like I have to trip over that. I can't miss it, right? Like there's no excuse, because I don't want to do it late at night, then I can't put it in the dryer. So I'll literally put the whole hamper like right there in the doorway, and my wife's like, come on, like really? But anyway, so I do this for everything. If I need to take something to work, I'll hang it on the doorknob so that I do not forget. It's impossible to forget. Like I'd have to be completely blind to forget it. So figure out ways that will prompt you no matter what. Now, does that get you to do the thing when you think of it? Not always, right? Because you may feel like, hey, I don't want to do an hour of laundry right now, or I don't want to do this task. The next thing will change your life forever if you actually get it, if you haven't gotten it already. Here's the thing. If I were to ask you right now to do 100 push-ups right now, how many here could do it? Some of you could do it, right? Some of you are like, yeah, maybe I'll get close, right? I'll be honest, I'll die probably at about 10 or 20. That's just reality. So here we are. You have two metrics. You have motivation, right? And you have ability. 100 push-ups, how many would say that is hard for you to do right now? It's okay. I'm there too. Okay, 100 push-ups is hard to do. How many could do it if you really wanted to? You have the ability. Okay, so if your motivation were high enough, I could tell you 100 push-ups right here, you could do it, right? Because for you, you have the ability. It may not be easy, but your ability is somewhere here. And if your motivation is high enough, you rise above the action line. Make sense? So here's the thing. If your motivation's low, what do? You have to do things that are not hard to do. You have to do things that are easier to do. You have to move right in order to dip above the line. You see that? So here's the thing. If you hate flossing your teeth and you just can't get yourself to do it consistently, anyone else guilty and had to buy a water flosser and that's technically not enough? I mean, it's a pain, right? The author of this book, he gives the illustration. He says, he just could not floss his teeth. So he decided he would floss one tooth a day. Because that's 100% better. That's 100% better than what he was doing before, yes or no? I mean, let's face it, right? One tooth a day. How hard is that to do? Easy or hard? How much motivation do you need to do that compared to all your teeth? Quite a bit less, I'd say. For me, I think it's the same because it's the hassle of pulling the floss out and trying to wrap it around your fingers. And last week, I was literally looking for metal flosses. I want to buy one of those metal flosses that has you can you put floss on it and then you don't have to stick your fingers in your mouth all the time. I figured it might make it easier for me to not always make excuses. I don't know. I've been trying to figure out how to engineer this thing. But here's the point. If I were to tell you to do 2 push-ups a day, you could probably do it. And you could probably do it every day for a while. Because guess what? It takes you 5 seconds. 1, 2, done, right? You could make some progress there. And over time, it would get easier and easier to do, and you could begin kicking it up a notch. Instead of 2, maybe you want to floss 4 teeth, right? Or do 4 push-ups, or whatever the case is. Things change as you become more accustomed to them. So imagine what you could do with this when you are low on motivation. How do you make something so tiny that you've got no excuse not to do it? Think about that. I mean, which is better? When you've got 100 emails to respond to, is it better to just sit down and do all of them? No, because you don't want to do that. You've got no motivation. It's not going to happen. This happens all the time. For example, I asked Esther recently, she was like, can you make the menu for the week? I was like, sure. Why do you want me to make the menu? Oh, because I hate planning the menu. So I'm like, sure, I'll make the menu. Great. So I made the menu, and it was amazing because in the past, she would struggle with the menu so much that she, on the one hand, she doesn't love cooking to begin with, right? But for her, the biggest obstacle is actually the menu. So I'm like, okay, fine, logistics, my thing. So I was like, here's a list. She's like, wow, this is amazing, thank you so much. No problem, that whole week, no shortage of anything. Next week, same thing. Next week, same thing. But then I decided to add mushroom pie. And for some reason, she was like, the crust. How am I going to do the crust? No, I don't want to do mushroom pie. So for some reason, we went 3 weeks, no mushroom pie. I was like, okay, well, that's fine. It's not the end of the world. But I was like, hey, what happened to the mushroom pie? She's like, the crust is just so hard. So I was like, well, what can we do to make that work? What's the issue? Could we buy a crust maybe? Oh yeah, that would make all the difference in the world. So, well, we didn't end up buying it. She ended up trying it anyways. But had we bought a crust, I would have had mushroom pie way sooner, right? Because that was the major obstacle. So if you can figure out how to make something manageable, it will change everything for you. Here's some ways that I do that. One book, Smarter, Better, Faster, by Charles Duhigg, put it this way. He would make things really small, and he would just get started. If you bring things into your control and something you feel you can do, you will always succeed at it way better. So put it this way. You've got 100 emails to reply to. You are not going to sit down and spend 3 hours responding to them, are you? But could you convince yourself for 2 to 5 minutes to write 1 sentence, draft replies to the first 3? Could you do that? Just the first sentence. Just start. Now, it would almost be pointless because you're wasting your time, right? Once you start, you want to maybe finish 1. But could you tell yourself 2 to 5 minutes and then I'm done? Probably, right? It makes it manageable. This is what I do all the time. I commit to doing the minimum amount of time I'm willing, and then I just do it. And then once I get to the end of my time and my watch goes off, I revisit and I'm like, I might as well finish it. And guess what? 99% of the time, I finished what I was doing. I may not do all 100 emails, but I'll at least get done 1 or 2, and that's 100% more than I would have done otherwise. And then after that, I start doing the same without a timer. I've discovered in my life that just that initial commitment, that first 2 minutes of beginning to do something, it actually erases all the apprehension and the feeling of not wanting to do it. I don't know how that works, it just does. It works every time. And in the few times that I'm like, I still don't want to do this, If I stop after 5 minutes, I've come to the end of my agreement with myself, and that's okay. If I do that every day, I'll still get it done. Envision multiple futures. I did this when I was asking my wife out the first time. Imagine what's the best possible outcome that this choice could have, right? And what's the worst possible outcome, right? And weigh those out. Might you regret taking or not taking this decision? I mean, if I'd never asked my wife out the first time and been like, hey, would you like to consider us getting to know each other a little bit better? I forget exactly what I said, but you get the picture, right? Like, if I never reached out that first time, I would have totally regretted it, right? And that's how it is in life. Sometimes we just have to weigh the options and be like, okay, am I going to do this or am I not? And it's the same with tasks in our life as well. Will I regret having spent an hour of this for the next hour? Sometimes it gives us perspective. And if you would regret it, then maybe you shouldn't be doing it. So, use that as a tool to envision things. How do you know God's will for your life? This is another big question. Here's a bunch of obvious ways. Surrender your will, pray, search the scriptures, look for providence, consult godly friends and family, be patient. When God finally speaks, do it. I remember for providence, Alan Parker used to give this illustration. I don't know if it was someone he knew or him or something, but he tells the story of he prayed or someone prayed to God and they were like, if a bumblebee flies past my window or something, that will be the sign. And lo and behold, it's the middle of spring, right? And there's bumblebees out. And it was just helped him make his decision to go ask someone. I don't know, it just seems like that's not quite providence maybe. But, be realistic. Not every providence is a providence. So, yeah, I mean, within good reason. But usually what happens is that if you see multiple of these things coming together and God is starting to lead in multiple of these areas, that's a good indication that God is leading a certain way. Now, here's the thing. Have any of you gotten through this process and God gives you two options to choose between? There's not just one, and now you're still stuck, right? And you're like, well, both doors could be open. I could pick venue A or venue B, and both are good, but I'm not sure which to pick. What do you do then? I used to do the flip a coin method, where I'd flip a coin, and then I'd hold it in my hand, and rather than seeing which side it was to decide, I'd be like, which side do I not want it to be when I look? And that would actually often clue me into what I felt I should do. But that's not the most reliable either sometimes. So I came across this method in a book called The Fast Lane Millionaire. Brilliant method. I used to do pros and cons, but this took it to the next level. Check this out. So when God seems to open two doors, let's say you want to move to Texas or Michigan, just for argument's sake, right? And you have two choices. First, you write down all the variables. What are all the options here? Well, weather. Weather is a weight of 7 because you could be gloomy or you could be happy in the sunshine. It might make a big difference. Maybe that's important to you. Maybe it's not important to you. Those of you who live in Michigan, it's probably not that big of a deal to you. I don't know. Otherwise, I'm just teasing. Schools, right? Are there good schools there? Yes or no? What about family who might, whatever the case may be? Cost of living, is it going to be, what about tax? Is there more tax there? These are all the types of things you were to think. Maybe the place that you would go to is kind of a sketchy area. Is it near family? That may be an 8 out of 10 in importance for you. So you number them all off. Now check this out. Then you start to weigh it out. Maybe you guys should tell me what these would be. So I've already given the first one away. For me, this is what I picked, right? You see my bias. How many of you are like, Michigan, snow? Anyway, schools. Right, if you were picking between the two, which one would you pick? What would you rate Texas? You probably don't know anything about the schools. Southwestern, right? That's the only school there. Who knows about Southwestern? No one. A few people, Southwestern. I taught there one semester. It's a nice small school, but Southern is way better. So, yeah, so schools, you might weigh it differently. So I was like, okay, well, Michigan's better than Texas. Cost of living, well, Michigan's a lot cheaper than Texas, so I said that's a 7 out of 10 for Michigan, 4 out of 10 for Texas, because Texas is not as great in that area. Tax, Texas is amazing for tax because there's no income tax. So you don't have to pay nearly as much to a state income tax as you would otherwise. Michigan, 3 out of 10 because tax is a bit higher. What about safety? About the same. I mean, depending where you live, that might vary. And near family, for me, My family's all in California. So guess what? Texas is way closer to California than Michigan is, so I put that higher. So then what do? You take your decision factors on the left and you multiply them by each option. So 7 times 7, 49, 3 times 3, 9, etc. You work all the way down and you come up with your answer, right? It's a super complicated way to come to the decision, but guess what? You've seriously thought through it when you do this. I just did this for flying to Australia, because I could fly to Australia for 2 different price points. The one price point was $1,300 a ticket. The other price point was about $2,000 a ticket. That's a big difference. But the problem with the $1,300 a ticket is that you had to switch terminals and come out and go back in through security again. And for me, that would be totally doable. I'm saving like $700 or whatever, sure. I'll totally do that. But the problem is that when I next looked at it the next day and was actually going to make the decision, I saw that the trip time had gone from like 30 hours to like 50 hours. And now you were like changing airports in like Tokyo and you have to like go across town to get to the second. No way. I don't care if that's $500 more. I might get lost. I'll have to get a visa just to be there because I don't have an American passport yet. Like, no, not happening. Like, I'll pay $500 more, $700 more because it's just not going to happen. I'm not going to risk it. And then I miss my flight, and then I'm stuck in Tokyo. So you get the idea. It's just not worth it. So I did this, and it came out okay, we're taking a direct flight. We're not taking a multi-trip journey. Just can't handle it. So, yeah, hurt my wallet a lot more, but such is life. So this can really make a difference. So here's the last thing. Something that made the biggest difference for me at UIC, in spite of saying, just fade into the background and let God get all the glory, when you appreciate those who are working under you and with you, it makes all the difference in the world. Plan intentional times to appreciate your team. Even if you're all equal, appreciate each other. Find ways to do it. Maybe it's one way I remember I was in programming, Moise Rotsaro, he came up to me, he's like, Eric, just thank you for all that you do. He has a little token of appreciation, and he gave me like a $20 Amazon gift card. And that made a difference for me. At that time, I think I was a student, and I just really appreciated it. It made a difference, and I never forgot it, because I was like, hey, he could have just said, and thank you to all our humble volunteers, and that would have been great. But to actually come up to you and appreciate you in a tangible way, it makes a big difference. So here are some ways you can do it. During a regular meeting, appreciating people. At the conclusion of an event, maybe. During an annual get-together, maybe taking everyone out, and saying, hey, look, let's go eat out together and celebrate the fact that the Lord really blessed in this event. Taking those times to appreciate and to celebrate is so important. I think I have one more. Yeah, and one-on-one is always more authentic than group appreciation. This is something I mentioned to Pathway because they were planning on giving all their volunteers a little token appreciation gift. I was like, look, have all the department heads go to their volunteers individually and just thank them with the same gift. It'll go way further than saying, hey, everyone come up to the front, grab a pen out of the box. Come on, that's not the same, right? It doesn't matter if it's like a $50 pen or something. Everyone will be pleased to have a pen. But to have someone personally, one-on-one thank you, way better. There's no comparison. So let me just go back, because I missed one thing when we were talking about anchor behavior celebration. Celebration, many times we think, once you achieve what you were going to do, celebrate. And people often say, oh, well, that means that you should go out and treat yourself to dessert or something. And they say, do something good for yourself. This is what a lot of self-help books say. It actually doesn't work. The psychology is that if you're going to celebrate about succeeding at something, it only works for the next 2 minutes after you've done it. So whatever you're going to do, maybe listen to a song that really feels uplifting to you, or jump in the air and say, yes, I did it, or whatever suits you. What do you do? What would you do if you won $1 million, right? If you won just a new car or something, what would you do? All of us introverts would be like, yippee, in our minds, and that's it, right? And all the extroverts are we'd be jumping around the house, right? Whatever it is that is you on celebration, do that. Maybe you're just thinking in your mind, oh, that was great. That's me, I'm a little bit not externally, I'm not the person to externally process everything. So for me, when I succeed at something, I'll be like, yes, I'm so glad I did that. But for other people, they're like jumping around. That's fine. But do it in that moment, because that will help reinforce the action subconsciously. And the next time you come to it, you'll remember those feelings. So that's just a little tip there. For your handouts, I gave you a whole long list of things to do. There's no way we can finish the whole thing in 4 minutes. So I'm going to give you the world record fast lane version of what that could look like. On your sheet, you see a whole bunch of steps. Is there an extra sheet? I think I printed a couple extras. Okay. On the back of your sheet, you see steps 1 through 7. I'm not going to go through all of it for the sake of time, but it's a series of steps that you can do. The instructions for that, you'll see steps 0 through 7 on the other side, on the front. These are the steps that correspond to the items on the back of the sheet. If you will follow those steps in your own time sometime, you will find that if you follow them to the T, you can initiate a plan for whatever you aspire to do, whatever your goal is. Like maybe it's, having everything ready for your next event 6 months in advance. At GYC, we pick our venues 4 years in advance. And then we pick our speakers 1 year in advance, and we have contacted all the speakers within 9 months before 9 months in advance. So like that's the amount we're working ahead, right? So like if you had a crazy aspiration that's just like wow for you, work through this process. Ask things like, how can I get my motivation? Can I make that tiny? Maybe I'm just working on this 2 minutes a day. And then over time you're like, I think I could do 4 minutes a day. Work through the process. Use the different tools that are on the back here that are explained in the details and see if it helps. If it doesn't make full sense to you, it should make somewhat a decent amount of sense as you read through it. Pick up the book. The book is amazing. It's called Tiny Habits, as per the poster. So check that out. I'm going to leave the rest of the time open for any questions you may have, short as it is. And we'll take it from there, because our time is just about up. Has this been helpful? I hope so. Yeah, okay, questions?
I have a question. So when you're talking about team, what do you do when you have a team member that you've assigned them to do something, they do it, but they don't do it, quality-wise very well? How do you deal with that without putting them down?
Yes.
Snubbing them?
That's the difference between delegation and empowerment, usually. And that's usually a matter of extreme ownership where you need to take ownership for that and say, look, we may have to take one now and just go forward with the subpar work, or you may have to have a conversation. Now, it's very difficult to do. If you had started out showing them how to do it in every step, you may not be there, but once you're there, right? So in that type of situation, if you have fostered, and if you haven't, start. If you fostered a habit of appreciating people and valuing them, approach them and saying, look, I really appreciate the work you put into this. I see you did a great job. There are a couple of things that we would like to do to take this to the next level. And frame it in the positive. Don't say but, don't say however, build it up as you're adding to it, right? You're making it sound better. And as people say, compliment sandwiches, those are so fake. Sometimes what I do is I'll start with the negative and then I'll end with a positive. Just mix it up a bit, because sometimes people expect that. But yeah, rather than using but, try to use and say, hey, look, we're trying to get a little bit closer to this goal. Or try to frame it as positive as possible, and then end with appreciation. Say, hey, how can we work on this to get to that point? I don't know if that helps. There's no easy solution sometimes, especially if there's a bit of tension. But yeah, empowerment will help prevent some of those issues. Anyone else?
How did GYC get to the point of planning 4 years ahead? Because obviously you started out, you were planning 4 years ahead.
Yeah, by the time I joined, they were already pretty much planning 3 to 4 years ahead. The problem is that venues at that size are booked out that far ahead. And so they have to pick venues. We don't plan everything else ahead at that time. They would pretty much just plan the venue and hotels and stuff, and that's about it. Even the logistics and details of hotels wouldn't come in until probably the year of or the year before. So themes were always figured out before the conference, sometimes the week of the conference, sometimes at the conference. So there's some years we were like scrambling to design something just so that we could announce our next year's theme. Yeah. And one thing about that, we always started with theme first before picking speakers, because we wanted God to lead and his word to lead, and then we would say, like, who's going to speak? Because message is always more important than messenger. Yeah. Other questions? We have overtime. 1 minute. If not, thank you. I hope this has been helpful. Oh, yeah, one more.
I was just not quite familiar, but what's the best thing you've done that's been a time saver in your life?
Asking the one thing question, actually. What one thing could I do such that everything else becomes easier or irrelevant? It started with, I think it started with a smart lock. Either that or a smart light bulb in my apartment. I was like, hey, how else could I save time? So I was like, I'm always like opening and unlocking my door. I was like, could I get a smart lock? So then I got a smart lock, and like when I'd walk up to the door, it would just unlock, and I didn't have to spend 20 seconds there. Like, it seems so tiny, but like just the feeling of success when you just walk up to your door and it opens for you, basically. It's kind of trivial and pointless, but it's that mentality with everything. So, yeah, I don't know if there's any one thing. Probably the best came from earlier, like picking my top 3 things for the day. That's huge. Like, that's made me go way further, along with reading, because that's usually one of my top 3. Yeah.
How long do you spend every day reading?
I mark out up to an hour, but usually 20 to 40 minutes. And I let my phone read to me while I read along, because by having 2 senses engaged, both your eyes and your ears, your comprehension doubles, and your speed that you can read also doubles. So if you like information on how to do that, if you've got an iPhone, Android can do it too, but it's a little more complicated. Just go to my website, ericlouw.com/blog. But you have to say /blog, or it'll take you to my wife's business. So yeah, ericlouw.com/blog. It's an article on how to read 40-ish books a year for $0, because you can also like use apps that give you free books legally. Any other questions? I think we're done. Thank you all. If you have other questions, you can connect with me before I vanish in short order. So flight is coming up. But I wish I could have been here the whole week. I have the 60th anniversary of my former church that I was at. They begged all of the former pastors to be there. So I was like, okay, I'll come over. So I've got to give like a 5-minute spiel there about all the things I appreciated from my time there. So that was already on the table. So I'm going to get to miss out, unfortunately, in the next couple of days. But I am praying that your organizations and movement increases, because I see a real need. I noticed that with GYC, our age demographic actually went down during my term. It used to be a little bit older. We started averaging like 14 to 15. Like 60% of our audience was like 15 years old, which was significant, especially when you have a lot of parents there that are like way in, like skewing your data. So I don't know what was up with that, but yeah, we cater it more to 18 to 35, but for some reason, depending on the year and place, it's tended to skew downward. So I think that you're reaching a very needed. The fact that we had young people coming to something that we aimed a little higher on demonstrates that there's a need. And I think that you're scratching where that itch is, perhaps more effectively even than GYC has in many cases. So keep up the good work, and I'd love to hear more about the cool things that you're doing. Add me on social media. Yep.
Thank you so much for coming all the way here to share these presentations.
Yeah. Yeah, no, glad to be here. Why don't we close with prayer, and do we need to pray for the lunch, Bill?
Sure.
We'll do both. Father in heaven, Lord, we thank you for the opportunity to learn and find better ways and maybe more effective ways to serve you. Lord, I pray that you would use these various tools that we've talked about, kind of a smorgasbord in many ways, to help each and every individual here. Lord, maybe not all the tools will be effective, but maybe 1 or 2 could make a big difference. So I pray that you would bless those. And Lord, we also pray that you would bless the food that is coming and bless those that prepared it. In Jesus' name, amen.